Can you give me your full name and occupation, please?
Noel Soleyn.
Okay, and where do you currently reside?
Rosebank.
Your parents, what about their names and their occupations? What did they do?
My mother was a homemaker, and my father was a laborer. Did all kind of odd jobs. He did farming mostly, but he would migrate every now and again to England, where he would make some money and come home because he didn't want to leave his children alone. So he'd do 2 years and come home, and then maybe spend like 4 years and then go back again and come again. So that's about the long and short of that. My mom had 11 children, so she couldn't do much work anywhere else.
By the way, how old are you now?
I'll be 65 this year.
What about your brothers and your sisters? You had any brothers and sisters?
Oh yeah, there are 11 of us in the family. One just died. He'd be buried today in Corpus Christi, Texas.
Okay, what are the names?
There's Kenneth, Edward, Katie, Clayton, he's dead, Patricia, Sam, Ingrid, well, me of course, Paul, Susie and Judy.
And they're all scattered different places all over?
The majority of them in the United States.
Okay.
Eddie's in England and the rest of us at home. The three of us at home. Patricia, Susie and me.
What about your uncles and aunts and those on both sides?
There's one uncle left alive. He lives in Florida. All the others are dead. But I had, on my mother's side, there was one aunt, one uncle, because there were only three of them. On my father's side, they had Uncle John, Uncle Joe, Uncle William, Tante Gina, two other aunts. One was Tante Mina, and one was Miss Crosby.
Mm-hmm. Those were those that you're aware of?
That I'm aware of on my father's side.
Okay. Your grandparents, you know anything about them? Or
but my grandfather, he used to live at Chile.
That's in Georgetown?
Yeah, he was there at a place he called, I remember him telling me he was at Lot 14 in the eruption. And
that's where the geothermal site is sitting now, thereabout. Okay.
But he said the avalanche came down and covered parts of Lot 14, and he said a lot of people were scalded to death. His mother was among one of them, who died in 1902 eruption. He was born here, but my grandfather, my great-grandfather, on my mother's side was Bharat Singh. He came here in 1862. He came on the boat lift, 1862. And when he was christened in 1875, they changed his name from Bharat Singh to James Alexander because one of the godparents' name was James Alexander.
And in those days, they gave you your godparents' name?
Just like this, his other relative over here, who was, well, he wasn't his relative, but he was married to his sister. His name was George Bones. That was the name of the priest who christened him in the Anglican Church. So he gave him his name, George Bones. So that's how they lost all the names. Lost the original names and took the names of the white people. My uncle is 92. He lives in Florida.
What's his name?
Beresford Sutherland. And that's Bharat Singh's grandson.
Wow. And those were all farmers, right?
Yeah, well, Bharat Singh.
At least your grandparents.
My grandparents, my mother's father was an entrepreneur. He had 3 rum shops. He had one here, he had one in Chateauguay, and he had one in Chumok. So he had 3 rum shops. My grandmother, again, was a Huggins. My great-grandmother was a Huggins from Georgetown, Sarah Huggins. And she, of course, was a homemaker also. She had many children. So they were not in the labor force out there. They stayed at home.
So this also connects you to the Huggins in South of us?
Yes, all the Huggins that come from Georgetown, Indian Huggins. I don't know for the other races, but I know for the Huggins.
The Huggins. Mm-hmm.
The Huggins and I would be related, and the Clark.
Your grandparents lived where? Where did they reside?
My grandfather and my mother's side live right here. So I inherited this property.
It's in Rosebank, yeah.
Mm-hmm. My grandfather and my father's side lived at Morris Village, Rocky area,
Okay.
in Kingston. My grandfather, mother, and my grandfather's wife, I didn't know.
Okay.
She died before I came around.
All right.
But,
What about your other relatives? Anyone that you remember that still stands out? Maybe a cousin or somebody who you really got along well with growing up?
well, the majority of those people would be gone now. They would be either dead or migrated. But there was the Mackenzies, who of course we were related to. This whole Indian community in Rosebank was just one big family, where Bharat Singh left Argyle and came to Rosebank, and the others just followed, thinking that there was something of interest in following Bharat Singh, and they ended up here. But as to close relatives, as close as it may seem that the Indians were, there was always rivalry between them as to who would achieve most, who would be the wealthiest one among them. And so even though you were relatives and you would eat from the same pot, aspiration took a different tone, because everybody aspired to be wealthy, and in the process of wanting to be wealthy, you didn't care who you kicked down to get to the top. But if one of them got in trouble with the law, he wouldn't go to jail. They would all band together and bail him out. So
it was just like this friendly rivalry between them.
yes, there was always this friendly rivalry between them.
In terms of your parents or grandparents, did they ever tell you about their foreparents who came from India and the stories about it?
Yeah, but we never really took interest. It was a long forgotten case. Nobody cared about that, not knowing that somewhere along the line you would have wished that you had listened. But
So you don't remember any of the names that they mentioned to you, the Indian names? Or
no, there was never mention of an Indian name.
except the Bharat Singh?
Yes, they would refer to one another as Big Popo and Little Popo, sister, big sister and little sister.
Okay.
And there were certain names that they would call one another, family names, like nicknames. But you know for sure that Bihari later became known as Mackenzie.
Right.
You know
and that was a Bihari from the Richmond estate.
That's right. That's right. And because one was married to the fella from the Richmond estate, she became known as Miss Richmond. That was my great aunt.
I see. Is the Richmond surname still around?
No.
It's gone.
They call her Miss Richmond, but she was married to a Mackenzie. So the Mackenzies are actually descendants of this Bihari fella who was referred to as Mr. Richmond.
You said that you didn't know so much about them, but in terms of the stories you heard, most of them came on the Richmond estate, correct? And worked on this side of the island.
Well,
those that you were connected to?
No, those that I am connected to came to Rosebank. Because they had two estates going in Rosebank. One was this estate that stretched from the bay right up into Rosal, called Linley Valley. And there was the other estate which stretched from Chateaubalay, go right up to Tap Hill, which Tap Hill is a 500-acre estate. And that was owned by Mr. McDonald. So there were two white planters, and they were both growing sugar cane, because there's an old works at Peterbiddle right close to the river,
right,
going up to the falls. And there's an old works right up at the Anglican Church. So both of them, both McDonald and Linley, were planting cane. But what happened in Rosebank is that after the sugar failed, the Indians were able to buy the lands, because they were working on the lands. They were working Mr. Linley lands. So Mr. Linley said, all right, I'm moving out, I'm selling. So they were...
So he went back to England, basically?
Yes, he just disappeared, leaving the people, especially the Indians, because they were the only ones in a position to buy. And when the Indians actually settled in Rosebank, there were just about 5 Carib families. So
Okay.
the Indians actually, Rosebank actually belonged to Indians. And when they left Argyle, here's where they settled.
And then after that, they sold lands to different people moved in and intermarried and all of that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. But they held on to the farming lands up until they died. They were the ones who held on to the farming lands.
So today, are there still a lot of persons of Indian descent living in the Rosebank area?
No, they migrated. They won't be only just my family. There's me, and there's Kenneth King, and there's one Marcella Bacchus. She was, I don't even remember, an inspector of police named Lester Bacchus. He was married to a lady from Georgetown, a Crozier from Georgetown. But that's, Marcel is his daughter. So they're just about, there's Nita.
It's a small remnant group.
Maybe five families.
And it was once predominantly Indian.
Predominantly.
It was more like what we have with called the Argyle, where we have mostly Indians living in that particular geographical area.
But they see people who were attracted to Rosebank because of the number of pretty Indian girls you had living in Rosebank. So,
Many of them migrated, you said?
yes, they all gone.
And they married overseas,
Yes.
different families, etc. now. In terms of the earlier times, what are some of the things that you remember growing up in this area, in this community?
Culturally, there was always the boom drum. There was, but the boom drum was never a product of the Indian society. It belonged to the Caribs. Caribs were the ones who were responsible for the boom drum. The whole thing became intermixed. We see the culture of the Indians fading, because even when they had this, the last one I remember was at an Indian lady up the road there, and they had brought animal and kill it, and they had rice and curry and stuff like that, and they were just eating with their hands. Those are things that we lost. People think it's a disgrace now to eat with their hands. You won't catch even Indians, full-blooded Indians now in Rosebank, or maybe in St. Vincent in general,
Spoon
eating
and
with
fork.
their hands. Yes, knife and fork and spoon. But I remember as a little boy going to the various families. We would go at night and we would play coop and all kind of ring games and stuff like that. In the daytime, they would call you, the older Indians, especially the ladies, would call you and send you to the ends of the earth, and you couldn't say no, you weren't going, because your mom insisted that you go, and if you didn't go, you get a licking. And especially those who thought they had money and was wealthier than the average run of the mill, you couldn't say no to them. So you would have to go on the land and pick up coconut and husk them and bring them home, and then they give you a piece of bread. And you're well paid, but the whole thing is you couldn't say no. You had to be there, you had to. That's one thing they never miss, walking you as a slave, even though they didn't like you, and they had no interest in you. The only interest was to be able to bring them something beneficial to them. When it comes to your meals and stuff like that, you had to get that for yourself. They wouldn't intercede at that time. But we, as Indians, we had to go. You had to put in your appearance and be jolly about it. You couldn't sulk. We would go to school. All the Indian children would go to school together. And it seemed as though, for some reason, the majority of the Indians excel in school better than the other races, because our family in particular changed the face of education in Rosebank. Because my mom, from early times, she realized that your only vehicle out of poverty was a good education. And she could have been a wealthy woman, but with 11 children to educate, and she wanted the best education for them, even though she couldn't afford it. And then that's where you have all of us being, well, I would say, with the exception of me, maybe well educated, doctorate and master of this. Some of us got more degrees than a thermometer. But I was always one wanting to make a living from doing business. The thought of working for people never really drove with me. I wanted to be my own boss from day one. And that's why the university and the colleges, and well, I went to college in Corpus Christi, Texas, but to really sit down and go on to do doctorate and stuff like never really appealed to me.
Okay. And how would you say life has changed since then?
Well,
now compared to then?
Well, life changed. The main driving force behind all the changes, not only in Rosebank but in St. Vincent, was the introduction of marijuana. And when marijuana came on the scene, everybody became wealthy. Even though you were poor, you thought you were wealthy. Because you could push your hand in this pocket and pull out $5,000. You push your hand in the next pocket over there and pull out $7,000. And everybody started to talk to everybody in any old way, because now you were no better off than me. I had money just like you. Although a lot of it went up in smoke, but that changed the lifestyle of especially Rosebank, because Rosebank was the heartland, the early heartland of marijuana.
Okay, of course, then it was a deeply underground industry.
Yes.
Unlike now where the dynamics are changing as it relates to the industry.
But then you could make $1,000 for a pound of marijuana. So I got into it too. I was there. I was planting it. We never smoked it, but we sold everything: stick and bush and seed and flowers. Everything went. It went for between $1,000 and $800 a pound.
Okay.
So that's when life changed for everybody.
Okay, and that caused a lot of development. People built.
Everybody wanted to build a bigger house. Everybody wanted a big
competition started.
And the competition started. In those days, people never repair; they replace.
Okay. So if your vehicle if you had an old vehicle, you might just buy another one.
You get rid of it. You buy another one.
Okay.
Although it might not have been better than the one you had. Everybody wanted a new one. Everybody wanted a new boat, a new engine. Your engine went bad. You pulled the boat up. You took the engine off, and you go to Mr. Punen, Pali Punen. Or you go to this guy out Howard, and you buy a brand new engine. Put it on your boat, because at that time, money was flowing in the street. The guys would buy a case of beer, they wouldn't drink half of it, they mash up most of it on the road, and they pour it over one another. You had 2 beers, one in each hand. That's what changed life.
Yeah. Tell us about your treasured memories growing up, some of the things you remember as a child.
Well, going to the sea on a Sunday until you learn to swim, and then when you learn to swim, you could go as often as you wanted. Because if you couldn't swim, then you had to wait until your parents were going. A big sister, a big brother was going, and then you would go with them. But once you learned to swim, you were on your own. You could go at any time, go to any beach, because you could swim. Parents weren't afraid anymore that you would drown. Even if although you could swim, you could still drown. But going in the lands with my old man, because we had about 50 acres of lands in Windsor Forest. They were only accessible by boat. And so you would go there with them sometimes on a Saturday. They bring home yam and manico and go on and stuff like that. Because the guys used to set manico pits, set a can in the ground and bait it up with ripe banana. And of course, when you go back, because they were just ton loads of manico in the hills. You would go rowing, shove down somebody's boat and you go rowing, because things would differ. Your way of life would differ, depends on where you live. Like you in the interior, you would be more like going to the river to jam crayfish and stuff like that. We would be going out here in a boat and learning how to fish, learn how to sail a boat, learn how to row a boat.
You would have good times, and of course you'd have some bad times as well, and sometimes some hardships in between. Any of those days you recall? Things got really challenging.
I remember that we used to drink, Mom would go in the back there and get some lemongrass in the morning, and she would make your tea with that, or buy some cocoa chocolate. There was no milk to go with it, so you drink it just like that. You drink the bush tea just like that, and there was yam, maybe potatoes that was boiled. If that was all you had, you drink bush tea and yam, and you went to school a happy camper. You know, you drink the cocoa, just the cocoa with sugar in it, and yam or potato as the case might be. 12 o'clock there might be anything to eat, but you would get something when you come back in the evening before you go to bed. You know, but I think what all that did to us was to make us appreciate what we would work for later on in life. Because you had nothing to start with, and now you achieve something, only a fool would throw it away. But life was no bed of roses. Life was hard. You know, but we managed. You could think of 11 children, having to look after 11 children and a wife, and you didn't have a regular job.
That must have been a challenge.
Yeah, you don't know where the next dollar is going to come from, but the old man would go and break stones and sell $11. I think it was, in my time, was about $11 for a load of stone. Thereabouts, you know, and that's how he made his living. Set coal pit, because we had a lot of trees on the lands in Windsor Forest, so you go up there and set coal pit. But he loved to drink, and so most of the times the money make you drink it out, you know, forgetting he had 11 children at home. So life along that line was a real challenge. Right. You know, nowadays, back then, you look forward to Christmas where you get a piece of ham and a piece of loaf of bread, and that was good. But because of the change in life, you could buy a ham every day. You know, you could bake every day. So those things lost the glitter, the glow as people became more wealthy. But back then, piece of stew pork was a luxury.
Okay.
You know.
In terms of anything you would want to change if you had an opportunity to do that during your lifetime, anything in particular? And why would you want to change it?
Well, to tell you the truth, Calvin, if I had to live my life all over again, I live it the same way. Maybe without the hardships. But if I could change anything in life, would be to be able to give to these young people a good education and teach them about God. Because this generation now has forgotten God. I would want to give them a good education so that at least they wouldn't have to be as ignorant as they are, and they wouldn't have to work as hard as they are working now. You know, in the age of technology, I guess machinery and computers and stuff like that should be doing the work for you. And you do less work and more enjoyment of what you work for. Yeah, if I had to change anything, I would change the way they educate people.
Mm-hmm. What about the country as a whole? St. Vincent and Grenadines, what would you change if you had the power to do so, or if you had the capacity to do so?
Oh, man. First thing I'd change is the politicians. You know, and hold politicians accountable. Let them declare their assets before they go into politics, because like Chaki said, before a lot of them get into power, they would be able to buy just the coconuts and sell it. But you get into power, you buy the estate. You know, after 5 years, you buy the whole estate. So I would like to see laws set up, integrity legislation that would say how much money you started with, and at the end of your 5-year, 10-year tenure, how much you ended up with. And if there's a discrepancy, jail you. If there's a big discrepancy that you cannot account for, then that's poor people money. You should be jailed.
In terms of the foundation itself, the SVG Indian Heritage Foundation, are you aware of the organization? And if so, what are you aware of in terms of the functions?
I'm not aware of the full functioning of the organization, because had it not been for Luan Luan, you were there when they came?
Yes, we passed by.
We would not have been really educated about the heritage, and as such, the people around here, I think I might know more about the heritage than the others, even the new members that we recruited. So I think the heritage has to make a genuine effort to talk to people, talk to the Indians, although there are not many left, and this side from Barley down, and make them aware of what is going on and how important this is to you as an Indian. You know, what is in it for you? What the foundation could do for you? Because, you know, Calvin, everybody wants to know what is in it for me. You know, you just call me up and tell me join a foundation, be part of this. What's in it, you know, for either me or my relatives? What is it all about, and how could I be a part of it that would be beneficial to me? Not just be a member of the Indian heritage and that's it. Oh, a member of the Indian heritage, oh, big deal.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about the accomplishments? What would you want to see the organization? You have a basic knowledge of what it represents in people of Indian descent, and you know, making that connection with India. What would you want to see the organization?
Well, people want to see something tangible. People want to see like somebody from the village has been elevated to another position, and knowing fully well and good that was through the Indian Heritage Foundation. You want to see tangible things happening, things that you could relate to. And then you could say, oh, I'm a part of a good organization, a part of an organization that caters for its people.
And I think that's about it. Did you enjoy sharing the story and chatting and
It's always good to chat with
reflections?
As the fella says, it's always good to chat with family.
Thanks very much for taking the time out to talk to me about this. Yes.